Amen. All right. I'm going to move up, Mike, because everybody keeps moving back. So just let me know if I'm just a talking head on screen. So hopefully this isn't too far. But we are in Proverbs Chapter 11. We got into verse 1 last week, just the first verse. That's where we ended up. And so we are going to pick up in verse 2 in Proverbs Chapter 11. So we'll put our little window pane, our little diagram up there. And if you have your slips, they have a little more information than I can fit on the screen and make legible. So those are also useful tools as we think about working through the Proverbs and putting them into different categories, and then how that impacts our thought process and our application of them. So verse 2 says this in Proverbs chapter 11. When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. All right, so let's start out by saying, where would we stick this? Which one of the 9 boxes? Or what do we think it's about? Okay, principle. And there's not always just one right answer. We could stick it in more than one sometimes. So if there's someplace else, don't be shy that there's one answer and only one answer. I don't think that's the case all the time. Okay, maybe Paz. Okay. And a couple more that I thought of. Yeah, people's one, because it talks about pride or the proud and the humble. So two different kinds of people. And one other that I thought might fit. Yeah, end, because it talks about what comes at the end, or what the consequences are. So this is a contrast. Obviously, the first half of the verse is talking about someone who's proud. The second half is talking about someone who's humble. So what does pride bring into your life? Disgrace, okay. So that shame in New King James. Anybody have another translation other than pride? Probably not, but I wanted to check and see. So proud, the word in the context, we wouldn't really think of pride the way we would in English. It has to do with the picture of a pot that's boiling, or someone who's seething. You know, the idea that what happens when a pot boils and you're not paying attention to it, and what ends up happening, or what could happen. It boils dry and the bottom falls out. All right. That's not usually what happens in our house. We've never experienced that. What's the other thing that could happen? You yell at a child because they're not paying attention and it's boiling all over the stove. And one of the commentators made this observation that the idea of a pot boiling over fits the idea of arrogance, because when we're arrogant, what do we do in terms of, do we stay in the pot or do we overflow the pot? You overflow. He likened it to someone who is arrogant oversteps beyond where they belong. They think they should be here. They think they should be able to talk about or give advice or make decisions in this area or that area, but they really don't, and they really shouldn't. So, with humility is wisdom. So someone who is humble, or who's not arrogant, who's not proud, is wise. Why does God have this perspective about pride, or someone who's proud, and humility, or someone who's humble? So he certainly knows us and what we think and do. And if we're not humble, then obviously there's going to be consequences to it. What does in the context of God's perspective, what reason do you have to be proud? And what do you have reason to be proud about? Nothing. Yeah. Compared to God, we have nothing to be proud about. We should never be proud in the context of looking at him, who he is, what he has done versus who we are and what we can do. So I believe that's one of the reasons God has this very negative view of pride, is because we don't have a right to be proud in context in relationship to him. So the question from verse 2, application. Which are you more tempted to be, proud or humble? No, we can all answer that. The next question is, why are we tempted to be that way? Okay. Now, the third question you're not going to like. Where is there pride in your life and my life? It's not a question of if, it's just where. You are, whether people know it or not, we are proud. We have that tendency. If we don't deal with it, where is it going to lead us? Where does it say it will lead us? When pride comes, then comes shame, or what did you say, dear, for ESV? Not destruction. Go ahead, Ed.
If I remember correctly, it was the fall, pride caused fall of Satan.
Mm-hmm. Yep, he wanted to be like God.
So, obviously, I would think that he would endeavor to cause other people to also fall into that sin of pride, because of the sinful nature that we possess.
Yes, you are correct that Satan fell because of pride and his arrogance. And there are those that argue that pride is at the root of most, if not every sin. If we look at it, the reason we are choosing to do that is because we have the pride that says, I'm right, or I know better than God. Verse 3 says, the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. So where would you put verse 3 in our box, in our diagram? N, yep, certainly. Talks about guiding them or destroying them, depending on which section of the verse you're in. Anything else maybe you think of? People, yep. There's certainly, again, the contrast between two different kinds of people. Anything else? Path, okay. All the ones from the last one. C, answer above. Yeah, and I think that I also thought that you could talk about principle as well. But it's a contrast, again, like the previous verse. What does having integrity mean, or what does having integrity look like? Okay, it's the way a person lives their life. So that's a big umbrella statement. What does it look like? If you say Jim has integrity, Ed has integrity, Dan, Carl, they have integrity, why do you say that? What do you see? How do they live that makes you recognize that?
The construction company I worked for had a saying on the wall. It said, integrity is doing the right thing even when nobody's looking.
Okay. Integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Okay. Now, I think that's a good way to define it. Is there anything else you would add or you would put with that of what living with integrity or what integrity looks like? So a good reputation, someone has a good reputation, or a company has a good reputation. Okay, so there's a fewer poor choices. That doesn't mean they're successful all the time, but they do make wise or more often make wise choices. Okay? When or if we have integrity, what does Solomon tell us will happen, or what does it do for us? Okay, the right people will come alongside you. Okay. Okay. So if the right people come along, or we are the right person for someone else, what is the result? What happens according to the first half of the verse? You have a better path through life. Why do you say that, Vicki? Guide them, okay. So, what does guiding look like, or what does that make you think of or picture? Okay, you accept good advice.
Open to that, and would be the opposite of what we're talking about being prideful. If you're prideful, you don't need anybody to help you.
So as in contrast, Jim's contrasting it to the person who's proud. They don't need any help. They have all the answers. Okay. What is the famous picture in Psalm 23 of how David describes God? A shepherd. What does a shepherd do for the sheep? He leads. Right. And it could be you could say substitute guide as a synonym. And that's what I pictured. You know, the integrity is going to be a guide. It's going to direct you in the right way and in the right path. It's going to keep you from getting off track or in trouble. If or when we do not have integrity, or we are perverse, what happens? Or where do we end up? Destroyed. Now, I don't believe this is necessarily death or immediate, but it can be your reputation. You know, how long does it take to rebuild a reputation? A long time, yeah, if you can ever do it. Now, you can, but it takes work, and it's not easy. So I think it's more in the context with that than simply the physical destruction, but it can also mean that as well. So, which is easier, to have integrity or to be perverse? You think it's easier to have integrity? You need to come up here and teach, because I'm going to tell you it's a lot of work to have integrity. Because what did Jim define integrity for us as doing the right thing when no one's around? When's it easiest to do the wrong thing? When no one's around, or you think no one's around. I'm not saying that I do that, but that's when it's most tempting. No one's here. No one's going to see me. There's no police officer. I can go 75 or 80 or do whatever. You know, I don't have to come to a complete stop at this stop sign. You know, integrity would say, no, you stop, you look, you follow the rules of the road. I don't know if I should ask Carol this, but why is having integrity so difficult? Okay, certainly we have sin nature, and we're battling that. Any other reasons why having integrity is so difficult or harder? Yeah. Jim said, everybody else is doing fill in the blank. Why can't I do it? The boss isn't here. Why can't I? Having integrity is hard because that one time when maybe you don't and people notice you, we just talked about, you can ruin and then have to rebuild your reputation. And it's always easier to take the lazy way or the shortcut, because that's, as Carol said, that's our nature. We don't want to do the hard work. We want to take it. We want to be having the result without the work. And integrity takes work, so it's harder. It is the goal, and it is God values it. God encourages us, but it's also not the easy way. It's not the easiest out of the two. It's the easy way to say, I'll do what's right when I'm being watched, but not when I'm by myself. And that's not having integrity. Mm-hmm. Or in the terminology of Proverbs, it shows wisdom, but maturity is another synonym we could put in there. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It's like telling the truth or lying. It's always easier to tell the truth because you don't have to remember what you lied about. Well, if I lied, did I lie about that? Who did I lie to? So yeah, with the context of integrity would be very similar, but it's easier in that respect if we're willing to look and say, if I do it this way, here's the consequences. If I don't do it this way, here's the consequences. But we don't always do that. We just simply look at the immediate and say, as Jim said, everybody else is, no one's watching, I can get away with it, and we just go on our merry way and do what is natural in the terms of our sin nature. Yeah, it's a balance. At one point we're walking with the Spirit, and then we're at the other end of the spectrum, and we're doing the exact opposite. Well, I think it will. I don't know if it'll get you past that bar, but it certainly will keep you on the right side of the pendulum swing longer and for more often. So verse 4. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. All right, so where would we put this one? And thank you for whoever, I think my son turned on the fan. That's nice. All of a sudden it's like, there's a breeze. Where would we put verse 4? Where do you think? Yeah, end is the only one I thought that fit. Now, I'll listen if you guys have other ideas, but that's the one that I settled on, and I couldn't find any others that I thought fit well. It is another contrast because it talks about the day of wrath and the day of death, but it's the result or what happens on those 2 days. According to verse 4, what do riches do for you, and what don't they do for you? They don't profit in the day of wrath. Okay? That's what they don't. What might they, or what could you say they do for you? It's pretty handy, yeah. Yeah, the context, I think Jim is absolutely right, is that up until that point, there's some benefit to having money, right? Not in the judgment day or the day of wrath, but up until then, boy, it's nice to have it. So they do something for you until you get to the end of life or to the day of wrath. So what is contrasted in verse 4 with riches? Righteousness. what does righteousness do? Delivers you from the day of wrath, or delivers you from death. All right. So, what is the principle, or how would you explain the lesson Solomon's trying to teach his readers and specifically his children in the context that that's who he's normally teaching in Proverbs? Okay. Yeah, I think you're on that. You can't take it with you. You know, the old joke that there's no U-Haul going to heaven or attached to your hearse. You take in what, or you take out what you came in with, which is basically nothing. Everybody's life's end. So what are you investing in? I'm paraphrasing Althea, I think. And whether you're investing in, riches or righteousness. Okay, little is much when God is in it. Yeah, Jesus was specific about that in the Sermon on the Mount. Lay up treasures in heaven. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the rich man and Lazarus is certainly a parable that fits within the context of this verse. I appreciated this one statement that I came across in studying this verse. It says, God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't respect anyone. The Lord's wrath cannot be bought off. And that's the context of the riches, that it's going, in this life you can buy off a lot of things. You can pay off a lot of people. But not in the context of God. God is not a respecter of persons. And as Althea said, when you look at those two options, righteousness or wealth, we see the value of wealth on earth versus righteousness in the context of culture and society. But God says it's totally opposite in His culture and His society. Righteousness is a lot more valuable than wealth. So the question then is, what do we value? Which is more important to us? Not only what's more important, but what do we pursue? Are we pursuing righteousness, or are we pursuing riches or wealth? Now, please don't interpret what I just said as you need to be poor and not have any money. That's not what I'm saying. As Jim said, it's helpful to have it here on earth because we do need some level of resources to survive. But what do we value and what do we pursue? Verse 5. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. All right. So, where would you put this verse? The end? Yep. I think there was only one other that I came up with. Path, yeah, because it talks about the way or the path. So, New King James says, the righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright. I don't think that's the greatest translation. Does anybody have a different one? Maybe it would be helpful. The righteousness of the blameless makes his way straight, and I think that's helpful. Some translations would also say makes his way smooth. So what happens to the righteous? Less bumps. Okay. So less potholes. Does that mean they have an easier life? Yeah, I think that has something to do with Althea, that it's very clear. There's a direction they're going. Also, there is less twists and turns, meaning wherever they're headed, the goal, they go straight to the goal. They don't get off track and then have to come back around. Now, that's the righteous. What happens to the wicked? Falls by his own wickedness. So who gets the wicked in trouble? Who gets them off the path, in the ditch? Themselves. They have no one else to blame. It's not someone deceived me or someone tricked me. They ended up where they are because of themselves, because of their choices. You know, they will end up not on the straight and narrow, as it were, not heading towards the goal, but in trouble, and then finding their way into destruction or to destruction. Again, this is the mindset of looking and saying, here's my choice, not what happens in the next 5 minutes, but in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. Looking down the road and saying, what I choose now, where's that going to lead me in the future? Where am I going to end up? So I think we have time for at least verse 6. Verse 6 is another righteousness and wicked. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. So again, I think it's a end of the choices and a contrast. So what happens to the righteous in verse 6? Delivered, okay? Rescued. What happens to the wicked, or in the context, I think he says unfaithful? Traps them. Okay? Any other translations besides describing the people as unfaithful? Transgressors, okay? Treacherous, yeah, that's helpful. Any other translations for what happens to the unfaithful transgressors, the treacherous people? Taken captive. That one I think is much more in line with what I understand the Hebrew to be trying to communicate. You can also say trapped. The idea of being caught is a little deceiving. The idea that the lust is their own fault and they're reaping the consequences. So what comes, we can see easily and quickly what comes from being righteous. Salvation, safety, protection. What comes from being wicked or faithless? They punish themselves. Yeah. They punish themselves. Not intentionally. They never think they're going to. But they get tangled up in their situation in the context of this verse is their lust. And say, I'm now trapped. I'm now stuck. I'm now ensnared or taken captive. The context of my mindset or my terminology for this would be addictions, life-enslaving sins or life-dominating sins, things that people stepped into and said, this isn't going to be a big deal, and now they're stuck in there and they can't get out. You know, you don't get stuck like that with righteousness. You do with evil or with sin. How does this proverb help us become wise? Because that's the goal, is wisdom, gaining wisdom. What do you think? Okay. A wise man is looking for a way to stay out of trouble, and they will find it if they're willing to look. Any other ideas or suggestions? It's painful to do your own self. Yeah, that's a pretty morbid thing out there, but I think it's accurate. The idea that what are we willing to let ourselves not only step into, but then control us. Because these people aren't simply controlled by the sins, they're actually destroyed by them. They're ensnared and they can't get out. Now, that doesn't mean God can't rescue them, but on their own, they're never going to get out. So are we cautious about what we're willing to allow to control us or to direct us? And going back to the earlier verses, that, which direction are we going? What's driving us? And recognize that sin is enslaving on a multitude of levels, and we need to be careful of that, especially as a believer. Questions, comments, we'll pick up in verse 7, Lord willing, next week. But any thoughts or comments you want to make before we close in prayer? A lot of righteousness in there, yeah. That's an encouragement and a challenge all at once. All right, well, let's pray, and we will be dismissed. Father, we thank you for the challenge and reminder of looking at our decisions and being cautious of, as we consider choices today and where they'll lead tomorrow and in the future, and being aware that we can be caught or ensnared or trapped or enslaved if we're making the wrong decisions. Lord, help us not to be enslaved or trapped by our sin, but to be pursuing righteousness, to be growing in wisdom, not just in knowing what's right, but in doing what's right. Lord, we look forward to the week ahead, the things that we have planned and scheduled, but also the opportunities that you will give us to serve you, to serve others, and to be testimonies for you. May we be setting a goal each day this week to be pleasing to you, no matter where we are, what we're doing, or who we're with. We thank you and praise you for the opportunity to be here, to study together, and to be sharpening each other and encouraging each other as we wrestle with the practical applications of your word, and especially of the wisdom of Proverbs. We thank you in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.